For more insight on the outcomes of the Shangri-La Dialogue, let's speak with Dr. O.E. Sun. He's a senior fellow at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. Dr. O, Asia's premier defense summit comes at a time of numerous security challenges, but none more so than the US-China rivalry and its impact on the region. What did you make of how that played out at the summit?
Well, I think at first, because the defense secretaries of the United States and the Chinese defense ministers, they were not having bilateral meetings, so a lot of attention were paid on, for example, whether they would like to somehow exchange ideas during the summit and so on. But at the end, I think they only shook hands, number one. And then number two, we were also looking forward to very sharp exchanges of words. But the speeches by these two most senior defense officials, they were a little bit underwhelming in the sense that you don't see that kind of trading of the barbs as was in the previous Shangri-La dialogues.
Now, Dr. O, so you said that, the speeches were a little bit underwhelming. You had expected some sharp exchanges of words. Do you think then, main US-China issues were sufficiently addressed? So they both spoke separately. What were some of the key points for you? And also bearing in mind, this is very significant because it is also General Li Shangfu's first international public address since he became a defense minister in March.
Well, I think both sides, I wouldn't say they have a consensus, but I think they were trying to, shall we say, tame down the rather heated atmosphere over the last few weeks and months, in their own respective ways. The United States emphasized, for example, that it did not seek to confront China or to have conflict with China. On the Chinese side, although the Defense Minister Li hinted strongly that China does not quite welcome the presence of these extra-regional powers, namely the United States. But still, there was no very sharp exchanges of words, even though the speeches are, shall we say, they were a day apart. Yeah.
And Dr. O, at last year's dialogue, Ukraine's President Zelensky made an address, but this year the defense minister attended in person along with some other high-profile European delegates. They'd like Asian countries to do more when it comes to condemning Russia and supporting Ukraine.
Well, of course, the Ukrainian defense minister would like to have so. And then you had the Indonesian defense minister, Mr. Prabowo, sort of touting his own version of a peace plan. But it was not quite welcomed by the Ukrainian side, as I noticed, because I think the Ukrainian side, they are very adamant on reclaiming all of their lost territories to Russia.
Dr. O, what do you read of the U.S.'s commitment to Asia following, the Shangri-La dialogue, as well as Asia's sentiment regarding fears of another Ukraine happening in this region?
Well, Austin put a lot of efforts into emphasizing the various alliances built up by the U.S. Over the last year. And I think that's how the U.S. would envision Asian countries grouping together and then, in a sense, having a rather strong security posture. But of course, the Chinese side is less than pleased about that because from a Chinese perspective, it's an attempt to so-called encircle and to contain China. I think therein actually lies this main difference between U.S. and China. The U.S. and some of its allies would see a stronger China as being potentially threatening to the security of Asia-Pacific, or as they say, Indo-Pacific. The Chinese side would see their own rise as inevitable, and especially when it comes to the Taiwan issue, they would not yield an inch from their perspective. So therein, I think, lies this potential for conflict and confrontations, even though both sides would like to tone it down. Yeah.
Dr. O, the summit was attended by over 600 delegates representing nearly 50 countries. Do you think there's enough focus on the other more universal challenges like energy and food security and climate-induced crises, for example?
Well, those issues typically would be put on the agenda, but my experience attending the Shangri-La Dialogue would imply that even over the past years, they're usually overshadowed by a certain crisis of the year here, be it the Ukraine-Russia conflict, be it in this year the U.S.-China confrontations, in past years, for example, disputes over the South China Seas and so on. So, yeah, all these climate challenges, for example, should have a more front and center role in the summit, but unfortunately, they are typically overshadowed.
And Dr. O, there was also a meeting between 24 of the world's major intelligence services on the side. Some, tout it as like a secret meeting, and it included the US, China, India. While we won't know what was discussed, how important is an opportunity like this?
Well, typically for Shangri-La dialogues, you will pay attention to speeches of the U.S. Defense Secretary and the Chinese defense ministers, and also some other ministers. But it's also an opportunity for all these other countries to have what they would call sideline meetings, right? Either bilateral, as Dr. Ng had with some of these defense officials, or multilateral ones. Sometimes several countries would see their defense ministers, or as you indicated, intelligence officials meeting together, because, well, I mean, otherwise you would have to deliberately set up another occasion to meet up, right? So Shangri-La Dialogue does provide that sort of mid-year meet-up opportunity for these senior defense and intelligence officials here.
All right, many thanks for your thoughts this morning. Dr. O.E. Sun from the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. Thank you for joining us.